It's after 7, so we might as well get started here. This, I guess, is mostly a financial deal of find out what we can do in that way. So I'm just going to actually turn it over to Tim and let him go to work. Yeah, I can hear it.
Okay, buddy, did you want to? Okay. All right, so there are two things, and they're kind of the same thing, okay? So if you feel like it's the same information, it is, and we'll email these out to everybody in the church. But one is the slides from for the presentation here, and then the other one is just a little bit more fleshed out the numbers, so you can see some more of like where the information. I put basically main points on the presentation, but then got a little bit more in depth if you're interested in more detail, so you can see where the numbers come from. And if there's any of these numbers where you're like, well, where did this come from? How did this? Just ask, and if there's more numbers that you want, I think we have all the relevant information here, but we can do that. So really, the first point is, and there's a better, the drawings out in the entry, and we can get some of those emailed out to people too. But the focus here tonight, like Charlie said, isn't so much the plan. That was the last meeting, the potential building. But I put it on there just as a reminder. Essentially what we're talking about is a 60 by 86, I think it is, addition. And this sanctuary area here would be renovated too. So that's the scope of the project. But I wanted tonight to narrow the focus a little bit more so we don't try to cover too much in one sitting. Buddy and I have been looking at these numbers for a few years here and talking them over, so it's pretty well ingrained in our brains, but to focus in on the important parts. So the second slide of the presentation is the two questions that hopefully we can answer or have a discussion about tonight. The first question is, can we afford the proposed building? And I have that underlined and bolded for a reason. The word afford is a little bit hard to define, and even more so with the church, because the equation is different. So we're going to look at some numbers because we need to be smart about this and make sure that can we afford it. But it's more complicated than that, because when you're dealing with just a business, it's strictly numbers. And if this was just a business and people were cash flow, I could stand up here and definitively say, yes, we can afford this. But it's not, and people aren't cash flow. And the purpose of this isn't to make money or any of those type of things. It's a totally different scenario. So that's where faith has to come in. This is a big project. And it's pretty easy to be like, wow, I don't know if we can handle this. And sometimes, I find that creeping into my own mind, like, this is a really big project. And to an extent, we need to have faith in God that He's going to provide, and this whole virus world is going to change and people are going to be in the pews again. It's going to take a lot of faith if we're going to move forward with this, whether it's now or down the road. It's going to take that faith. And at the same time, even if somebody came here tonight with a check for $850,000 and said, I'll pay for the whole thing, which if you want to, come on forward. But even if somebody did that and we had the money in hand, that doesn't mean we should do this, because the next point on there is stewards. We are stewards of this money. We already are stewards of a big chunk of money here in what has built up over the years, and we'll look at those numbers. But even if this money comes pouring in, that doesn't mean we should do this project. Okay, it has to be that this is a decision that we as a congregation feel is being a good steward of God's what God has blessed us with. So that's the equation, and it's tough to answer that question. Can we afford this proposed building? And then the second question, the first part will be more of a presentation of these are the numbers and this is what I think is relevant. The second part I hope is a little more discussion, and for the people that watch the playback of this, if you want to come up and talk into the mic or however that goes about. But I really want to hear from people on the second part especially. But even the first part, if you have a question, jump in and ask it. So the next slide of this, I have a few things that I think are relevant. Again, people are not cash flow, the church is not a business, but looking at the relevant numbers, I have graphed there and in more detail each year what the offering received was all the way back to 1992. And one thing to point out, in those early 90s there, that was right after, was it 91, 92 when the addition was built? 93. So it was built in 93, and I forget the exact numbers, but in the 2 or 3 years following, $65,000 came in to pay off the loan that was taken, and that is not factored into this graph. That was above and beyond. So you can see that our giving increased in those few years after that building came in on top of the money that came in to pay for it. Okay? So the building was paid for in, I think, 3 years, and that, again, was on top of the regular giving. So the graph shows the giving that has increased over the years, and you can see a pretty steady, gradual increase into the 2000s, and then right about 2005, there was a pretty big increase, and not going to hide from it, the one little dip that is on this graph was in a couple years there where we were without a pastor, and that's something that everybody brings up is what if, and you know, if I don't want to go off on a rabbit trail, but if the strength of our church is only in who the pastor is, then we don't have much of a church in the first place. The strength of a church has to be in the congregation, and we have to have faith that that's going to continue. And I'm not saying that in any way putting down Pastor Todd, because he's phenomenal. We all know that. And I do think it would have some sort of an effect. But just to point that out there, that's the one dip on the map. And then you can really see since the last 10 years, it's been pretty unbelievable how much the giving has increased. I should point out the last data point on there, you see for the year 2020, that's a projected number. Our giving through the first half of the year was actually about $1,000 more than the first half of the year last year. So, this is a weird time, and if you've been coming to church, I probably missed more church in 2020 than the rest of my life combined. But I was here last Sunday, and it's strange not seeing the place packed like it had been. And that's a legitimate worry and concern, but there's a lot of people watching on YouTube. It's kind of nice in some ways if you have young kids that you're not so worried about them making noise. So I get that perspective, but people are clearly still participating with the views on YouTube, and the giving is actually increased compared to last year. So that might be something that is worth noting for people. The other item on the left side of that slide is basically to let you know we have been spending, it's not like we're just scraping by here. We have been spending and we have been raising our fund balance at the same time. So the average cost for an intern, we've had 3 of them now, and there's slight variabilities in like the size of the family, or in one case is single person, so costs are different, but on average it cost Rose, our portion, $34,223. And so we've done that now in the last few years. We've had 3 interns, and there's more detail on what I'm referring to on the one page, that shows in 2006 we built the office. In 2007 we did some air conditioning. 2008 we put money into the parsonage, and so on and so forth. We've been doing pretty sizable projects. I mean, in 2010 we spent like 55 grand on carpet and expanding, and all during this time our fund balance has increased. So in 2005, end of 2005, our fund balance was 48,454. By 2016, that had pretty much doubled to 99,546. And then the midpoint of 2020, we are up to 116,812. So we are building up what we have on hand. And these things that I've listed, that's not all inclusive. The Deacons Fund has done things to help different people. We've helped kids go to Bible camp. We've helped pay for the Colorado trip. And I'm sure many, many things that I don't even know about that the church has been doing. And back to the question of stewardship, I'm not saying that we should cut everything and build a building. If that's what it took to build this building, I would be against it. That's my opinion. But another thing listed here is every year we give 12% of what comes in back to the AFLC. And there's a lot of good things that the AFLC does with that. And so that in 2019, that was $17,000, $17,356. And then I averaged all of those, the interns and the additions that we've done, things on the parsonage. On average, over the last 15 years, we've spent 16 grand, just over 16 grand on those type of things on average over that time span. So in that 15 years, which is probably the most relevant data points because it's recency, 16 grand to those things, and last year was 17 grand to the AFLC. So, that alone, those two things is probably in the neighborhood of what we're looking at our payment to be, and we'll get to that. And in the midst of that, while spending those dollars, we grew our fund balance over double. So that's where we're at financially. I know a lot of people, when we started talking about this, said, well, I don't know, can we afford it? And that's a tough question to answer, but hopefully some of these numbers are meaningful to you and you can see the context of why, if this was strictly business, yeah, we can afford it. And speculating, if we have, I've personally talked to people that have said, man, I love Rose, I've visited, Pastor Todd is amazing, the congregation is amazing, but I come there and it's just packed. Of course, that hasn't been said recently, but that was where we were at. That was part of what was driving this, and also the fact that our fund balance is building up and up and up and up. And is that being a good steward of God's money to just sock it away? There is, the reference in Matthew where the guy leaves the money with his servants, and then he comes back, and the one guy had just buried it, and he said, you could have at least put it in the bank and got some interest. And that's, at least we're doing that. We're getting some interest on some of this money, but we've felt, some of us individually in the council, that's not being a good steward of this money that's coming in, that we should put it to use, whether that's this building or not. And we have. We've been a big part of 3 current pastors' growth and education. So we have been doing a lot of those things that we as a congregation should be doing. So that's the first question. Can we afford it? And I'm not going to stand up here and say that I definitively have the answer. Each one of us needs to come to that conclusion ourselves. The second question is, okay, we as a congregation, and this would, happen down the road, we vote and say everybody says yes, let's move forward with this. We have to have a plan for how to pay for it. And again, this is where I want to have some discussion. I was in contact with Stuart McFarland from Citizens, so I'm not just making up these numbers. If we were to plan on splitting this up over 30 years, which I personally hope that 30 years from now there is not still outstanding debt on this building should it happen, the goal would certainly be to pay it down faster, because that's less money going to the bank and more money going to other things. But for illustrative purposes, let's say the building takes $850,000, which is the quote that we've received. We put $100,000 of what we have on hand, and I'm not saying we should do that, but we will put some amount of what we have on hand down. And the first line is we raise no extra money. We just dive right into this. And our payment, our monthly payment would be $3,500. The next scenario would be, okay, we're going to raise $125,000 on top of the $100,000 that we already have to put towards it. That brings the total loan down to $625,000, and our payment would be about $3,000. And obviously I rounded these numbers a little bit for simplicity's sake. And then the third scenario would be that we raise $250,000 plus the $100,000 that we already have. That means a loan of $500,000 and a monthly payment of $2,500. Okay, and then I have another column there for amount pledged. This is part of the discussion piece here. Should we have money raised? We would have to, if we're going to have a loan and we say that the loan is X amount, we have to have that money on hand before we get the loan, before construction can move forward. But we could maybe also have a stipulation that, you know what, we want to raise $100,000 more, but have at least another $100,000 pledged, or, you know, the scenarios are endless. But this is where, you know, we can do that through gifting. And if this goes forward, I'll do a seminar on some gifting strategies that some people could do and help facilitate that in tax efficient ways and things like that. We could do fundraising, whether that's to our own congregation and doing a drive to raise funds, or doing some sort of an event. Again, pledges, people have different opinions on this, but somebody might say, you know what, I'll put forward X amount of money if I see this happening, and so I'll pledge that money. Well, if enough people pledge money, that might give us the peace of mind that the money is going to come in. And then the loan, I don't see any way to do this, maybe that's a lack of faith, but without any loan. But certainly, again, if anybody wants to write a check for $850,000 tonight, I'm not going to turn you down. But, you know, those are the variables. Some combination of those things. So I don't know if anybody has any questions up to this point or any initial reaction. Feel free to blast them out. I realize that's a lot of information to take in too. Yeah.
What is the going interest rate right now on $500,000?
Yeah, so the question was about interest rates. I illustrated assuming a 4% rate, and when I talked to Stuart, he said, you know, unless you're actually applying for a loan, we can't say this is your rate. It depends on what interest rates do. If I just refinanced my house not that long ago at 2.75. This is not a mortgage. This is not a house. It's God's house, but it's a different situation. If the bank got stuck with the loan and we walked away, which we wouldn't do, but they have to look at it that way, is what their risk is. So the percent he said is illustrate 4%. If it happens this fall, it could be a little less, which would bring our payment down. But illustrate 4% is what he told me to do. So that's what I'm basing this off of.
today's dollars and labor and materials, stuff like that, would be somewhere in the neighborhood of $450,000 for that addition. So you can see what you're getting for the dollar.
Yeah, so if you couldn't hear the people watching the video, Charlie just said what we did in the early 90s in today's dollars would cost us about $450,000. So what we would be building for $850,000 is, you know, it's a massive expansion. It would seat 240 some people, I think was the capacity. And actually more, because there's the mezzanine up above that could be used. It would bring all the Sunday school kids out of the basement, create those classrooms. It would add additional bathrooms. It would just do a lot of things, expand the dining area, pretty much an expansion of everything that we currently have. And it would still, the current basement would be grandfathered in, could still be used. And the entire addition would have a basement underneath it that would house mechanical and storage and things like that. So, and that's clearly a massive amount of square footage that is there as well. Does anybody have an initial reaction or opinion on what they feel the target should be for, like if you see a loan for $750,000, we're not raising a dime ahead of time. Does anybody have an emotional reaction to that? I see some nods. Yeah, and I do too. I don't think we should do that one, but for illustrative purposes, I put that on there. I think that we do need to raise some sort of money. Back to the 90s, Buddy, maybe you want to talk about the 90s, because you have these numbers in your head better than I do. But like the amount of money that was raised in the years leading up to it, and then once it really happened, if you want to go over that.
Yeah, I guess I've done this before, but yeah, in the 90s, we started raising money. We started our building project about in 81, and then we finally built in 93. And like I said, we raised $15,000 approximately over those 12 years. And the minute we decided in January that we're going to start building in the spring, we raised another $50,000. And then of course, we borrowed the $65,000 that was paid off in 3 years. So that was then. This is now. I mean, obviously, our $850,000 or so is a lot more than 65, or it was 100. I think our total cost of the building was 135 or 140 in that area. And so it's a lot different, But if you look at our fund balance in '93 was like about $33,000. Or our giving, and now this year it's going to be close to 150. So if you look at it that way, that's what, five times the amount of money that we're taking in now compared to then. And so if you equate that to paying $65,000 off over 3 years, if you take that times 5, that's over 300. Almost, Anyway, that's just something it's whether here nor there. But the thing that I think the thing that the information that Tim has come together here is pretty well the way it would be. The thing that we have to do as a board and as a congregation is decide what are we going to, if we go ahead with this, how much money we're going to raise before we start. And that's something that I don't know if the board should decide that. I mean, we do have a board meeting on Tuesday night now, and we'll definitely be talking about it. And then do we decide? Well, do we have a vote that we are going to build, and then decide how much money we're going to raise, or do we? There's so many different things that what do we do? And we'd be you know, we'd certainly be open to opinions, exactly how we should do this, because, it's something, obviously, we don't do every day. But, yeah.
So that $850,000 is the structure, the construction. We're not getting another contents.
Yeah, the 850,000 is for the construction, yeah. I mean, that's the estimate, you know, obviously until we actually get the bids, you know, I mean, it may come in at $1 million, it may come in at 700,000, you know, we don't know for sure, but that's, the architect, you know, they come up and say, well, it's how many square feet and what we're gonna do, that's how we come up with that, yeah, so.
So that's wiring, that isn't,
Yep.
not the actual appliances.
It's the,
Pieces or-
here, Charlie, I got it.
This one on? Yeah. I think the only thing that we know of for sure that's not in that estimate is your seating in the new sanctuary. Everything else, as far as I am aware of, is included. The new bathrooms, your windows, well, now, that's not quite correct. These windows are separate, because that was a deal that we were working on before we actually started on our building project. So that is a separate deal, which is roughly $40,000. That being said, the outfit that will redo the windows will take them out, redo them, and give all the measurements that they need to the architect to include in the new building, so when they bring them back, they install them themselves. We don't touch them. Otherwise, they're not guaranteed. They will guarantee them if they do the work. So that part of it is just a little bit separate.
And you have to, this portion of the church here, you know, about where that window is approximately where the entryway is going to be.
Correct.
And there's be a bathroom on both sides. You know, and what they plan on doing is, once the new building is, they won't touch this structure until the new building is up. And then after the new building is up, this area gets gutted out. I mean, everything comes off the walls, it gets new sheetrock, it gets new electrical work and everything, you know. So it's going to be look a little different, you know. But anyway, that's part of the building project. I guess we're kind of more or less want to discuss here on the financial aspect of it. And I mean, you know, we can leave it up to the board and we'll have a discussion on what we should do. But I don't know. I mean, if we have a vote on this too, I mean, it's kind of hard now with COVID. You know, we get 50 people here, and I'm not exactly sure how that would go. And I mean, there's so many unanswered questions on how we go about this that I don't know how we're going to, exactly where we're going to go from here. But I mean, my opinion is that the cost is right in the ballpark. I mean, I don't think it's outrageous at all. I mean, I know it's a lot of money, but it's you know, there are many $1-million projects that goes on nowadays. And I mean, you have the Baptist Church in Roseau and the Catholic Church in Roseau, they just built, and I'm sure theirs was in that $1 million range or so. So I mean, it does go. And you know, like Tim said, if God means this to go, or as this is meant to be, it'll go. And I think if it's not, it won't. You know, and you know, we had a vote here a couple of years ago, and all that vote was just to look at it more, and it went down. And so I don't know. My personal feeling is, if we're going to have a vote, I want to make sure we get a good representation, and that everybody understands exactly what we're voting on. And because you'd hate to have information out there that people don't understand, and they vote it down because they didn't understand it, and then you start all over again. I mean, we started all over last time, this time rather, which is good, because I think they came up with a much better plan than we had before. So So that part went well, but anyway, that's basically where we stand. So,
So have you, looked at the changes in increasing the size? Ultimately, it's more to clean, it's more to heat, it's more
Yeah.
to, all those expenses. Plus, I assume we're gonna possibly need either an intern again or continue with that, or else we would have to, some kind of a youth pastor or some kind of
yeah,
something to help. So I think that has to be
Yep.
figured into the yearly.
yeah. Yeah, I know, the question was what, if we go ahead with this, do we, as far as a pastor, youth pastor, whatever, that should figure into what we do here, and I agree. I don't know how it's, we don't know for sure how it's gonna go, and could have we, or if we were having a building payment these last 3 years, would have we had in interns? Probably not, but you don't know that either. That's the thing. It's and a lot of times the initial few years to start out with is kind of the struggle, and then things kind of go, but I don't know. I agree. I mean, look, if we do nothing, we have, this is why we had all this money to spend on interns, because we don't have anything else going on, so we spent that money. So if we do nothing, you're right. I mean, we will have extra money as long as the contributions keep coming in and we get we'll have money to do different things. There's no question about it. But are we, by not building, are we, not fulfilling what God has in mind for the church as far as the attendance and what have you, and the people coming, So, I mean, there's so many different. Yeah, well, I mean, look, I'm sure if somebody out here had the answers to everything, they'd be up here telling us exactly what they're going to, but nobody does, I mean, it's, so anyway. So, I mean, obviously we're going to discuss this at the board meeting, and whether we come up with some kind of decision here next week and decide what we're going to do, I'm not sure. I guess I certainly would welcome people to come to the board meeting and people who are probably not here tonight, if they want to share their opinion on what could be done and go from there. But, because, last month when we had this, we basically, at the board meeting is when we decided to have this, so we made that decision after the meeting, and so we'll make some kind of decision on Tuesday night, but exactly what it's going to be, I'm not sure, so.
It would be nice if we could get, say, $150,000 in a building fund.
Yeah,
At least that.
yeah.
But
Again,
decide.
yeah, I think if we definitely were going to build, we'd get it, but just to have the money in a building, I mean, I'm just looking at history, Charlie, that's all I'm looking at,
It seems like unless you actually have a project, the money doesn't come in.
yeah.
So,
Well, I mean, I probably told this story before, but we paid off the building, and a year or two later, we paid $15,000 for an organ, and borrowed money, and it was paid off in 1 year, and then we bought a piano, and the same thing, and it was paid off in 1 year. And so, at that time, I thought, well, we should just keep on borrowing money, because, but, so I don't know. Anyway, I don't know if there's any more discussion that we have to have on here tonight.
So the old basement part still will be usable for Sunday school, is that
Yeah,
what they said?
Charlie,
anything that's here now stays, and it can be used for whatever we want. Sunday school room, sanctuary, it doesn't matter. There's no restrictions whatsoever on the basement that's down here now. The only thing that'll be done is at that wall level, it'll be taken off and a new basement put onto it. So, kind of depends on how the Sunday school really wants to run it. And we've still got, like Tim was telling me last Sunday, we've still got the mezzanine, we've got the sanctuary, we've got the old basement that we can use. I mean, we've got the room if this goes through.
Well, we can't actually have people up in the mezzanine, right? Isn't that what the architect said the last time he was here? Because of the code?
You can't designate it as part of the sanctuary and you can't put walls up there. You can seat up there.
Yeah, you can use it.
You can use it,
Room it off.
but you just can't room it off. Okay? Any other questions that we can try and answer? If not, I'd say that this is probably about as much information as we're going to get tonight. So, thank you for coming.
And if anybody, you know, we've got this taped, you know, and so we'll make copies of it if you know somebody who wants a DVD. And I imagine Pastor Todd, who's ever responsible for putting it on YouTube, will be put on YouTube. But I mean, we can mail out the handouts that Tim had and so on. But and anyway, we might be able to email that out to everybody anyway. So, okay, very good. Thanks for coming.